Rosemary once had a life she always considered perfect. She had found the love of her life and married the man she called the man of her dreams. Their life was harmonious, filled with love and happy moments. Rosemary felt that she had everything a woman could ever wish for: a loving family and a bright future with her ideal husband. But those dreams shattered in an unexpected moment. One day, Rosemary's husband came home for lunch, showing no signs of anything unusual. But instead of continuing life as usual, he suddenly ended his own life at home. This shock pierced Rosemary's heart like a dagger, leaving her unable to comprehend what was happening. In the 2 years that followed, her life became a series of dark days. She was completely lost, not knowing what to do or how to find purpose again. Everything she had built and believed in crumbled. The pain of loss not only crushed her soul, but also pushed her into harsher circumstances. She even went through a period of homelessness, wandering aimlessly without a place to call home. Despair enveloped her, and each day for Rosemary was merely an existence, not a life. Everything she once loved and cherished had become painful memories. She no longer recognized herself and had no idea how to escape the endless sorrow. Every night she prayed desperately, asking God to release her from her suffering. She prayed for 3 things: either to be healed, to die, or never to face this pain again. Then, about 29 months after her husband's death, Rosemary received another devastating blow. She was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer. The pain and loss had never left her, and now the onset of this illness felt like the final strike on her already exhausted spirit. Each night Rosemary lay in bed, praying to God, hoping that either he would heal her or take her quickly, because she could no longer bear any more suffering. She did not want a prolonged process, nor did she want to endure the destruction of her body by illness. Enough, she thought. God has punished me long enough. Please let me go in peace. She prepared for the surgery related to her illness, filled with expectations of some sort of ending, whether death or recovery. But worse things happened. During the surgery, complications arose. After the operation, despite profuse bleeding, Rosemary was sent home by the doctors. It was a biopsy, and even though her body was losing blood, she was discharged. When she got home, Rosemary quickly realized that she was bleeding to death. She stood in the bathroom, looking down at the floor, watching as the blood flowed. At that moment, she recalled the Bible verse from 1 Corinthians 10:13, which says, "God will show you a way out." Rosemary began to think that perhaps this was her way out. Maybe this was the answer to her prayers: deliverance through death. Standing under the shower, she felt her mind becoming hazy and weak due to the blood loss. In that moment, she realized she was facing a final decision. She thought that perhaps this was God's mercy, a way to end the suffering she had endured for the past 29 months. But then, another thought came to her. So many people had tried to save her during this time, putting in so much effort to help her survive. Perhaps it wouldn't be fair to just leave them now. Rosemary decided to step out of the shower and call out to her 2 friends who were in the living room. "Call 911. I'm bleeding to death," she told them. They quickly called an ambulance, and Rosemary was rushed to a nearby hospital. But things continued to worsen. The doctors made another mistake. They gave her morphine, which caused her heart rate and blood pressure to plummet rapidly. Her companion later recounted that at one point, Rosemary's blood pressure dropped to 32/25, a level near impossible for survival. At that moment, Rosemary had truly entered a near-death state. But something strange happened. In the moment when everything seemed to be ending, Rosemary's eyes suddenly opened. Her friend recalled that she tried to sit up on the emergency bed, something nearly impossible given her condition. Rosemary reached her hand toward the sky as if she were speaking to someone only she could see. Like a child reaching for their parent to be lifted up, she uttered a few unclear words before falling back down, and her blood pressure continued to drop below measurable levels. After Rosemary's body fell into a state where there were no signs of life, something inexplicable happened. Rosemary did not feel herself sinking into darkness or being lost in pain and fear. Instead, she had a very strong feeling as if she had been thrust out of her body. It happened quickly and impressively, like a piece of toast popping out of a toaster, or as if she were powerfully ejected from within her own body. Rosemary was fully aware of what was happening to her. There was no ambiguity or panic in her mind. She knew she had just left her physical body. This awareness not only made her feel completely conscious, but it also brought her an overwhelming sense of absolute freedom. She was no longer bound by the limits of her body or any negative emotions. The first moment she left her body was a feeling of lightness, as if all the weight she had carried in life had been released. Rosemary described that all her sorrow, anxiety, guilt, and regret instantly vanished when she detached from her physical form. It was a sense of freedom she had never experienced before. All the negative emotions she had carried throughout her life, the pain of losing her husband, the guilt of not being able to help him, and the worries about her illness, had all been shed. In those first few moments of this experience, she exclaimed, "My heart has stopped." It was a declaration not based on any knowledge of her body at the time, but simply a natural recognition. She knew she had died, and this realization did not frighten her. On the contrary, it brought her a sense of relief, as if she had finally escaped all the suffering of life. Interestingly, even in this moment, her long-time habit of being a writer did not leave her. Rosemary began to correct her own thoughts, telling herself, "Actually, I'm not dying, I'm already dead." That thought made her laugh, and the sound of her own laughter echoed in her mind, no different from the laugh she had always known while alive. She realized that every aspect of her laugh, her sense of humor, and her unique personality had crossed the threshold of death with her. Everything that made her who she truly was had followed her into the afterlife. Another important thought crossed her mind. What had she left behind on that hospital bed? And the answer came immediately. It was the pain, the regret, the self-criticism, the insecurity, and all the other negative emotions. In this new state, she had completely separated from those things, and she liked this feeling. She was no longer the person full of worry, fear, and pain she had been before. Instead, she felt like a completely different person, a version of herself free from the burdens of the past. As she began to sense movement in the space around her, Rosemary described it as though she had been thrown out of her body, but in a gentle way. She felt as if she was floating in space. She was fully aware that she was drifting away from the physical world and drawing closer to a spiritual reality. Around her was darkness, but it was not a frightening darkness. Rosemary described it as a soft, velvety blackness that brought her comfort and protection. This darkness was not merely an empty space, but seemed to be alive, with peace seeping into every cell of her being. It wasn't a cold or lonely kind of darkness. Rather, it was a space where she could feel love and comfort from the invisible beings around her. At this point, Rosemary began to realize she wasn't alone. She could sense the presence of spiritual beings next to her. These beings didn't have clear forms, but she knew they were there. They gave her a feeling of warmth, friendliness, and welcome. "They were so happy to see me," she recounted. It was as if they were welcoming someone home after a long journey, a long-anticipated return. In that moment, Rosemary felt that she had finally returned home. Her previous life, with all its pain and loss, now felt like a long dream that had ended. She felt as though she had lived 59 years, but now all of that was just a tiny moment, a very small part of her spiritual journey. The struggles, the sadness, and even the conflicts of earthly life no longer mattered. They had all become tiny specks of dust in the endless stream of time. In this experience, a deep sense of peace filled her entire body and mind. She felt as though the peace of God was infused into every cell, every vein in her body. This is the peace of God that people often speak of, Rosemary thought. It was a peace that surpassed all understanding in words, and she knew she could never fully describe this feeling. It was not just a state of calm but a liberation of the soul from all burdens. Throughout her life, Rosemary had often wondered what life would be like if she no longer carried the weight of worry and anxiety. Now, she had her answer. She was no longer the woman filled with stress, guilt, and pain. She had been freed from all of that, and she liked this new feeling. A complete freedom from all the pressures and fears of life. As she continued floating in this space, Rosemary had no desire to return to the physical world. She felt no attachment to her physical body or her previous life. To her, that was just a chapter that had passed, and now she was beginning a new journey, a new chapter in her spiritual life. As Rosemary continued to float in the soft, peaceful darkness, she began to sense the presence of something strange. Something she had never experienced before. Although she had already felt the presence of spiritual beings earlier, this time it was the appearance of a much stronger form. She felt as though there was a massive presence to her left, towering over her, as if this being was standing just behind and beside her. Rosemary turned her head to the left and saw no clear image, but she felt the power and presence of this being. She felt a deep connection, and before she could ask, the answer came directly into her mind. You are the image and likeness of me. I am the original. This was a direct message she received without words, but through an understanding that was instantly transmitted into her consciousness. Rosemary was astonished to realize that this was the explanation of the Bible verse she had spent her life studying. We are made in the image and likeness of God. She felt as if she had just uncovered a profound secret about her own existence and her place in the universe. For Rosemary, it was not only a spiritual connection, but also an affirmation of her self-worth. After so many years of feeling lost in the world, she now felt understood, loved, and accepted as an integral part of the spiritual realm. Throughout her life, Rosemary had often felt like an outsider, never truly fitting into life or society. But now she realized that she had found where she belonged. The spiritual beings around her rejoiced at her return. They seemed to be saying, "Welcome home, you have returned." It was a greeting filled with love and joy, making Rosemary feel as though she had truly come home after a long and difficult journey. With no ties left to her previous life, Rosemary felt her heart fill with gratitude. She felt as though her prayers had been answered. She had asked God to either heal her or let her go, and now she realized that both wishes had come true. She was not only freed from the pain and suffering of life, but also healed emotionally and spiritually. In that moment, she felt as if she had been granted an early pardon for having lived a challenging life while maintaining her faith. But then, something else began to change in Rosemary's experience. She noticed that ahead of her, a bright white door appeared. This door was not just a physical door, but represented the final transition, the ultimate destination she needed to pass through to fully separate from earthly life. The door carried great significance. If she crossed it, she would never return to her previous life. Rosemary did not feel fear as she gazed at the door. Instead, she was filled with curiosity and a desire to step through it and enter the other world. She knew that if she crossed this door, she would completely leave her old life behind, never to return to the suffering and trials she had once faced. As she prepared to approach the door, Rosemary felt the spiritual beings still by her side, continuing to protect and guide her. Though she couldn't clearly see their forms, she could feel their presence through every word, every sensation they communicated to her. These beings seemed to be creating a safe path for her to walk toward the door, as if shielding her from any potential turmoil. During her journey toward the door, something strange began to happen. The air around her, which had been a gentle mist, suddenly started to move. The mist was not just a blurry veil but began to swirl around her in circular patterns. The mist was not merely water droplets, but more like tiny beams of light, creating a beautiful dance around her. She realized that she was not just passing through space, but undergoing a process of purification. One of the spiritual beings explained to her that this was the process of spiritual cleansing. What she felt as swirling mist was actually the remnants of the physical world, false beliefs, impressions of illness and suffering, all being stripped away from her. This helped her understand that many people, when they die, still carry beliefs about illness or the pain from life, and this purification process was necessary to rid them of all those burdens before entering the new world. Rosemary clearly felt that she was moving closer to complete purity. She no longer carried any traces of illness or negative emotions. Everything was being cleansed, allowing her to approach the bright white door with a light heart, pure and filled with peace. Just as she was about to place her hand on the door to step through, a thought flashed in her mind. Is this God's will for my life? She paused, wondering if a medical mistake was truly the way her life was meant to end. That question arose in her mind before she even realized it, and the answer came immediately. One of the spiritual beings told her, "No, this is not God's will." Still, Rosemary didn't feel forced to go back. She was told that no matter what choice she made, she would be welcomed with love, compassion, and God's protection. There was no pressure, no obligation. The decision was hers to make, and whatever she chose, she would receive all of God's blessings. As Rosemary prepared to step through the door, an unexpected image flashed in her mind. She saw the face of the nurse who had held her hand in the emergency room. This nurse, with a kind face and comforting voice, had reassured Rosemary in her moments of fear. Now, in Rosemary's mind, the nurse appeared in a different scene. She was sitting alone in a dark room, head bowed, sobbing. She was crying because she had promised Rosemary that she wouldn't let her die. But now the nurse felt as though she had failed. Rosemary not only saw this scene but also felt the deep pain of the nurse. It was a pain filled with regret and sadness. Rosemary realized that the feeling the nurse was experiencing was the very same thing she had endured for the past 29 months since her husband's death. It was the feeling of guilt, self-blame, and the inability to forgive oneself. This moment made Rosemary pause. She thought, if I can save someone from the pain I've had to endure, I will. It was this thought that led her to make her final decision, to return to life. The instant Rosemary decided not to step through the door, she felt a powerful force pushing her back into her body. She didn't feel any reverse movement or any kind of resistance. Everything happened in an instant. She opened her eyes, back in her body, still lying on the emergency room bed. After deciding to return, Rosemary immediately felt a profound change. She didn't feel any reverse motion, no sensation of being pulled back, but simply opened her eyes and realized she had come back. She woke up on the hospital bed and immediately recognized that her body had returned to life. What had just happened felt like a strange dream, but everything was too clear to deny. Upon waking up, the doctors around her were astonished. For more than 10 minutes, Rosemary's brain had received no oxygen, and theoretically, she could not have recovered without severe brain damage. Yet Rosemary not only woke up but was fully conscious, with no signs of brain damage or cognitive decline. She had returned from death, and this left the medical staff utterly baffled. Once her heartbeat and blood pressure were restored, the doctors conducted a full examination on her. One of the hospital's leading doctors informed her that she had experienced a heart attack. However, Rosemary quickly responded, "No, I don't have any heart issues." The angels told me that if I decided to come back, I would be perfectly fine. Although the doctors still insisted on thorough testing, the results showed that Rosemary's heart was completely healthy, with no damage from the heart attack. After returning, Rosemary still had to face the stage 2 cancer she had been diagnosed with before her surgery. But she knew very well that she had been healed in the spiritual world. This gave her peace of mind and confidence in her health. She went to see her oncologist and informed them that there was no need for chemotherapy or radiation because she had been healed. Of course, this statement was not taken seriously. The doctor believed that Rosemary was having psychological issues and noted that she exhibited signs of psychosis in her medical records. Nevertheless, Rosemary insisted on further tests to check her cancer status. After several biopsies and other thorough examinations, the doctors were unable to find any trace of the disease in her body. Not only that, but Rosemary's tissues were completely healthy, with no signs of previous damage. The doctor finally admitted that without the initial test results, they would never have believed she had ever had cancer. Rosemary not only recovered physically, but also attained a new level of spiritual peace. Although Rosemary's body was now healthy again, the most important transformation was in her spirit. The near-death experience had given her a new perspective on life. After her husband's death, she had blamed herself, believing that she was the reason he chose to end his life. The pain and guilt had weighed on her for 29 months, making it impossible for her to forgive herself. But now, after experiencing those moments near death and receiving peace from the spiritual beings, Rosemary had forgiven herself. She realized that her husband's death was not her fault, and she had done everything she could to help him. This experience helped Rosemary let go of all the emotional pain she had carried for years. She felt as if she had been reborn, not only physically, but also spiritually. She no longer carried the burden of difficult decisions and overwhelming responsibility. She recognized that whatever choices she made in life, they would all be enveloped by God's love and protection. After being discharged from the hospital, Rosemary decided to completely change her life. She sold all her possessions, left her old life behind, and moved to a new place. She relocated to the Midwest of the United States, where she could live close to nature, among cornfields and peaceful surroundings. She realized that she didn't need any material possessions to feel happy. In her near-death experience, she had felt absolute happiness without needing any of the belongings she had held on to for so many years. For Rosemary, nature brought her peace. She loved watching the corn grow from tiny seeds sown in the soil. She felt a connection between the growth of the crops and her own life. She had been weighed down by pain and loss, like a seed crushed beneath the earth. But from that suffering, a new life had sprouted. Rosemary no longer clung to unnecessary things, and she felt lighter than ever. In the years following her near-death experience, Rosemary found peace and simple happiness in her everyday life. She decided to write about her story, though she initially rejected the idea. However, many people encouraged her to share her experience with the world, believing that her story would bring healing and hope to others. In the end, Rosemary completed a book recounting her journey. Through it, she wanted to share with everyone the spiritual transformation she had undergone, as well as the message she received from the spiritual beings. God not only loves us, but also likes us for who we are, without us needing to be perfect or do anything special to deserve that love. After many years of living in the darkness of loss and guilt, Rosemary had finally found the light of peace and understanding. She no longer feared life or death, and she felt ready to face whatever came next. She knew that when the time came for her to depart, she would be welcomed back by the spiritual beings who had loved her unconditionally throughout her spiritual journey.